I know we didn't prep for this. I don't want to do this as a full segment, Matt, but I mean, this has been a pretty embarrassing chapter for Taibbi, I think.
Yeah, I think I would recommend. I've recommended it all week. The Radio War Nerd episode with Mark Ames, Yasha Levine, and Gary Brecker. It's a good podcast in general and very interesting. Sort of prologue to it, which is Yasha and his family going to Russia and then having to flee during the mobilization order for Putin, like Putin gave like a few months ago. But the stuff about Taibbi is very interesting, and I think like their emphasis is correct, which is that he's doing this for a billionaire.
Yeah.
And Ames's point, which is like something they saw in Russia during the 90s, is oligarchs coming and buying publications that had some credibility sort of built up in communities, and then using them to basically do their sort of journalism, sensational stuff that serves their own interests. And that's what Taibbi's doing for Elon, and it's sad. I worked for Taibbi for Food Report. Good boss, as far as like fun to work with him and Perrine. Paid me well, because that podcast eventually ended when Taibbi sort of cancellation thing broke up. I'm pretty sure I made more money from that than those guys. The way it worked out, because I got a flat fee and they were just I'm taking the rest. But it's really depressing because he knows better, and like I've had this I've had this sort of a week after Brett Weinstein tried to cancel me.
Yeah.
Taibbi was on Dark Horse podcast, basically doing the same shit. So this idea that this is some sort of new thing, like this is a pivot he's been doing for basically since his career trajectory changed because of how he reacted to the exile stuff, and what was written about him and what was alleged based on his writings. And I thought it was unfair at the time. There's never been an accusation against Taibbi that I'm aware of. Everything that's said about him as a person is stuff they wrote in that book, which I am inclined to credit as gonzo journalism, which is like, yeah, I might say nonfiction up front, but this is so does like David Foster Wallace's McCain piece, so does Hunter S. Thompson stuff. This is a thing. But basically, Taibbi threw Ames under the bus for that stuff. After a long period of time, the entire time that I worked for him in Food Report, we told him, address this. This is what they try to fucking get you with. This is what, and it is people whose like good faith could be questioned. I think certain people were really troubled by things they read in that book. And I mean, the thing they were sort of really, and I guess to bring that book and sort of the point that they're trying to make, which is that point about how gross those, and they elaborated it in pretty disgusting ways, but like what happened to those media companies, right? They were writing characters of people who work at this stuff, but basically like Taibbi never addressed that. In private, we told him numerous times, like, hey, this keeps coming up. People keep like calling him a rapist in like the Majority Report comments and stuff, and like that's not great to see, I imagine. Particularly when there's no accusations, and that's horrible. But he should have addressed it. And like the thing for me, as somebody who was taking a nice check from one of his productions, was I've been in situations like that when bad faith people are coming at you for shit, and Mike Cernovich did that with Sam, and like it sucks. It gets your heart racing, but you have to confront it.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is Taibbi let it fester and fester until he was trying to promote an Eric Garner book that was getting some traction, some interest from folks, and then it all decombusted during an NPR interview because it sort of he let it fester and fester and fester, and that was the end of it. And I think this sort of shift has been going on since then. And like now, is when I get petty and I look back at like, oh, Taibbi says this about his analysis of Wall Street is actually, you look back on it and he says, that it's anti-capitalist and perverted by the state. And it's like these is like sort of classic libertarian things. Radio Warner even goes further into like Taibbi stuff about this is a kid, a guy. I shouldn't call him a kid, but he comes from media aristocracy.
Hmm.
His dad worked for all the major networks. It has very good connections, and people know that about Taibbi. And um, I think he misses that. I think he always wanted that. There's one moment, you know that who is it that makes fun of Burke for the dying bird quote? You know what I'm talking about?
I think so, but it's not coming to mind.
I'll have to look it up. But um, there's one moment when we were recording to our food report. This was like right after when Trump was in office, and I remember it to this day, which is like there's something about football and a Trump related football story, maybe like Kaepernick related. And Tybie's complaint was like, "I'm sad that all this stuff is political,"
Hmm. Hmm.
and it just seemed strange to me. Like I and maybe and it's like it's something like if he hadn't gone and like did this applaud Matt Walsh shit, like that's something like easily I can just like look past. But now it looks like he just isn't really he doesn't care about politics. Like he
Hmm.
cares about being a sort of media figure. And it's sad to see, but that's and he talks about losing friends. Like it's not just like me. Obviously he never followed me on Twitter. Like he's talking about like Mark Ames and Yasha and all those guys. And
Hmm.
what's interesting and why I think you should subscribe to Radio Warner is what him and I think Greenwald have been doing is basically what those guys do. Like they're like and it and I mean this Twitter thing, to get back to the subject at hand, is and Kyle Baer's written about this. It validates a lot of the critiques of the Snowden leaks
Hmm.
and how those were handled. And I still think, like, obviously you credit what we learn, and thank goodness we know that. But the Greenwald approach of trust us journalists to work with the Guardian and later Pierre Omidyar, there were people at the time that were very critical of that, including Mark Ames and Yasha and all those guys. And they were right. And
Hmm.
like, and that doesn't mean like I feel bad that we had Greenwald on or Taibbi on TMBS, because I think when those guys are still doing good work,
Hmm.
you do make allowance for that sort of stuff. But the more their work starts to sour, I think the more those things become salient.
I mean, I appreciate your perspective on this, like having the experience that you do, and it's funny thinking about back in the TMBS days. The book we were promoting was "Insane Clown President." Um,
I forgot about
a
that.
kind
Yeah.
of gonzo approach to the Trump being crazy and all this kind of stuff, and like knowing Taibbi, like because I used to read Taibbi a lot. I was a fan, particularly financial crisis stuff, and it's funny that like for us, I think we always remember, but I think for casual audience members or even younger people who, weren't really following the news at that time, some people might be surprised to find that like a Taibbi was writing, anti-Trump pieces like that as recently as, 2015, 2016.
People are pointing out that he should have been impeached for January 6th, but that now it's bad to moderate him
Yeah.
based on it, which is like, and I mean, you can look at the same thing Greenwald on January 6th was like, how is this happening? And then, it's not been nothing but minimized it since.
If I could just, talk less particularly about them and more broadly about like these Twitter leaks. I'm just become this is me just very briefly as like a person. I just I find it very hard for me to care um about this stuff. But I think our friend Ben's been pointing out that there's a lot of things, that have come out that are like interesting and are of like note, right? It's interesting to know what Twitter's up to behind the
Do you
scenes.
say Branko or Ben?
Ben.
Oh, I
Ben.
haven't seen Ben cover this. I've seen
Yeah.
Brankos, but interesting.
um I mean, it's just like, okay, well, is there some value in sort of like seeing behind the scenes? I think that's undeniable, right?
Absolutely right. Yes.
But as like a journalist, like I don't have a lot of credentials in that world. I mean, I've obviously been published and been doing this for a while. Briefly after school, I was trying to be a journalist, and I spent some time at like some like real like hard nose news organizations, and I got bored with it because I found it insane to cover politics and not have an opinion on what you're covering. But just like putting the journalism ethics, bring those to light, like no journal, like you could say a lot, we critique stuff we see at the New York Times, all this kind of stuff. It's 101 stuff. The owner of a company is giving you information and also designating how you publish it. Like you're not publishing it in a piece, right? You're using a new medium that just so happens to be the company that this guy owns that you're having to use on it. I mean, that is as far from a journalist as you can get. That's PR. And I know I'm not the only person who said that. But for somebody like a Taibbi and a Greenwald, and we know who they are now. We know what they've been saying, what they've been up to. But compared to other kind of political commentators, at least you can say like, oh, these people have gone and talked to people and written down what they said in a notebook, right? Which is a little bit more journalism than a lot of kind of political pundits ever do, right? Um, to do something like this, I think is true. Like I'm not even talking about the content or the
Yeah.
politics. I'm just talking about the straight up. You accept information from an owner of a massive publishing company, which Twitter, is in a lot of ways, right? Or media
Mhm.
company,
Right.
um, and then accept the conditions, which I mean, why are they putting on Twitter, right? It's not how you break
Accept
a
them
story.
and say you can't fully specify them, and then when you get around to specifying, as far as I know, doing it behind a paywall, and then not being clear whether that's the entirety of the restrictions, which I kind of doubt. I gotta say, like, if Elon said this is going to be on Twitter, why don't say that straight up front? Like he wants me to do this on Twitter. No one would bat an eye. I
Hmm.
mean, I also don't know why you be honest with about it if there are conditions and you are going to be that dishonest about it. So who knows? But
Yeah, I mean, again, like I find it to be, just being blunt, like low,
yeah.
um, for somebody who's done work in the past that I've very much respected. And again,
And you'll notice not defensible either. Like nobody's really defending. They're trying to, like, you zoom into the content. You'll try to zoom into the content, or people will zoom out and say
mhm,
like, "Oh, people are saying Taibbi is a conservative," and get into a debate. But nobody really wants to say like this arrangement here. I myself, as a journalist who am not involved with it, I think this is good and should be a model going forward because nobody can actually like believe that.
I know it's just like that. Yeah, at the end of the day, like my opinions on it, even separate from like, oh, what's the politics of it, what opinions are being done. I just find somebody who sort of might consider themselves to be a journalist to accept these kind of conditions are ridiculous. And like, I don't know. I'm creeping into maybe private conversations versus public ones, but like I don't get it. The only way I can maybe get it is financially, but like I don't know. I'm not trying to put myself up on like across the goal or something like that. As somebody who barely gets by, I can't imagine accepting a deal like that. And I reckon that Tybee's got revenue streams that far surpass anything I've ever seen. Um, to accept something like that is very suspect to me.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is like, first of all, I do suspect there's some sort of like relationship where at least like these guys are big time Substack subscribers or something like that. But even if there's literally no bank details or card details being transferred, Elon's regularly in Taibbi's replies being like, "Ooh, very good point. This is true,"
Excellent.
and
Yeah.
that is money every fucking time to Taibbi's Substack, and Taibbi knows this, and this is why he will never criticize the guy. And this has been a pattern for months
Hmm.
that I've noticed. This you search all of Elon's tweets directed at Matt Taibbi, and it's always just simping like, "Oh, very good point," or "What a shame on the New York Times," or this is that. And Taibbi's never done any sort of like response to, like, you got to poke the guy in the eye, or you got to deliver something better than this.
Hmm.
Okay, right? Like, is there a way for, like, we all believe in redemption around here. Anybody can come back, even Tybee from this, but it would be like, oh, here's Twitter Files part whatever the fuck we're at now, I'm gonna get into the Saudi Arabia stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's gonna happen because I don't think Elon's going to. I think there's probably one of the conditions that Elon ain't gonna allow.
Oh no. I mean, especially with Saudi and Elon. All right, but what if here? What if we're wrong about this, Matt? And what's coming next is the next Gonzo book about the secret Musk files, and this was all like a long, kind of Trojan horse thing to gain Elon's trust, and the big book's coming. Yeah, there we go.
Like, thank God.
That's a resurrection, and I'd be happy
Yeah.
to see that, but I highly doubt that that's what's
No,
happening right
I would love that. I would love if like and Greenwald's like, actually, I've been held captive, and all of the stuff I've been doing has been at gunpoint. I would like that. Like
Dude,
I would like.
I'm gonna tell sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is why, like, being a little zen, like, I will say I'm not the biggest fan of the hippy dippy stuff, but being zen is really important because you get mad and you start making mistakes, right? Talk about something that happened in Peru, you get a little wild. I can totally get if you are a major commentator, especially remembering what discourse was like on like online political stuff in like 2017. No doubt about it. And I don't think this is like a big surprise to anybody. It was annoying the hell out of Michael, like the kind of like whiny ultra left stuff constantly, right? But you have
Yeah.
to be able to compartmentalize these things and be like, oh yeah, people are going to be weird, and they're going to hold up whatever banner is like hot of the day to be weird about. What ended up happening, I mean, this is again like this me coming up with theories here. But Greenwald and Taibbi, like, let's just say they're just really pissed at like the state of like how annoying everybody was getting at the time, and this sort of like drove them mad. It's like you gotta have some thick skin if you're rubbing elbows like Taibbi was when he was abroad, or even in the United States when he was covering the Wall Street stuff. Like you have to have the ability to be able to step back and be a little level-headed and clear about these things, and not to let like a frustration with certain kind of tendencies or culture shit online um completely dominate it. Shows a weak worldview, I think, if you let like behavioral like antics of certain folks on Twitter like
Yeah.
really drive you in one direction or the other.
I gotta say, I think it's more material than that.
Yeah, probably.
When I worked for Taibbi, multiple occasions, I'll be a little bit spicy. He promised to tell me about the time that he got cut out of Glenn's Intercept deal, and how victimized he was by that. And I don't want to get into too specifics, but I will say that one of his books was being looked at by somebody famous when the whole cancellation stuff went down, and I
Mm,
think that might have also canceled that. And so I think this is a guy who misses bags
mm,
and wishes he had those, and now found another source for it. And maybe that's
mm.
too cynical, but I'm pretty cynical about Taibbi these days. Question:
Yeah, do you want to? Yeah,
what was the correct way for Taibbi to handle this
the
while
story.
still doing the story? And I mean, it's a good question. It wouldn't be to agree to conditions that you can't
No,
be
it's the
entirely
conditions that
transparent
are the
about.
problem.
Yeah,
If you're a journalist, right, especially somebody who has like a platform, when you get provided with information, you have a responsibility to your readers um to make that public. That's what your job is. That's what your social role should be. Like the most like New York Times documentary, and why journalists are freedom fighters for democracy kind of thing. Like that's the idea, right? You get information, you do stuff with it if it's in the public interest, right? No doubt about that. But any journalist worth their salt will also say, why is this information coming to me? What
yes.
is the point of this?
What
Um,
reservations do I have?
what
Maybe.
reservations do I have? And even if the stuff that you're getting is notable, you still find a way to get it out there to the public, but you don't accept. If Coca-Cola handed you like all of their shit, you know what I mean? Internally, would you accept like Coca-Cola, like, rules about how and where you publish this and what mediums you use? I think everyone understands why that's a huge conflict of interest. It's even
Yeah.
more so when somebody who owns a media company is saying you have to use my media company to publish this shit,
Yeah.
right? That's a red flag, just straight up. Um, And so it's not whether or not, I mean, as I said, like, I think that there are certainly things here that like might rise to, at least if not the level of like, public need, public interest, in the sense of like, yeah, if you have information about how a major platform like Twitter's operating, it's worthwhile for people to know. But also, if you're being handed information, you should be doing a little bit more digging than just, oh, here's the shit that I got, here you go, everybody, on the platform that they're demanding that I do it on.
Yeah.
That's not journalism at the end of the day. That's using your trust, your credibility, your name, to provide public relations for a new owner of a company.
Yeah, and there is also a more radical way to do it, um, which wouldn't rely on the sort of elite journalists handpicked by the new owner, but would just be to dump the shit, dump it. You have files,
Hmm.
dump them. Let the people sort them out in open source way. And there's reasons that the Snowden files weren't just dumped,
Hmm.
and those reasons can be persuasive. Uh, but it's also like you're relying on journalists, and like for the Snowden leaks, like Pierre Omidyar has ownership of those now, and hopefully there's nothing he's sitting on that we don't want to know, and there's certain people that say actually there's not much more relevantly interesting that we aren't aware of, but we'll just take their word for that, I guess, right? Like, right?
Hmm.
I mean, um I like this, it's just like it's not a it's this sort of story, you can't work with the boss. I like that's all, like you
Yeah.
have to have some sort of
It,
awareness of what there is to gain for this guy.
especially, and as you know him better than I do, but in my interactions, somebody who, if I recall correctly, maybe fog of war is mixing things up in my head, was very cynical about the role of social media platforms, and the role in American politics at the time. Um, I don't think at that time subscribed to the narrative, which is what effectively the Musk leaks have been trying to say, that Twitter is like this ideological arm of like the Democratic Party.
No, and that's the thing is like I think there's stuff to learn from like moderation, and I do encourage Elon to give everyone the full archive of moderation
Hmm.
decisions that affect their account. That stuff should always be public and not proprietary. And let's see that actually happen. I'm not we'll see.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, go ahead.
Like, last thing, just to be very clear, because we haven't talked like specific. The shocking revelation, is that there are open lines of communication between political parties and people in government and Twitter,
Yeah.
and they're acting on it, and that's bad. I think that that's just like that. I think that's fundamentally something that should alarm folks,
But you know
right?
what? A little bit of like, unless you have more on that, I like on that. I think that's interesting. And I think this needs to be put in the context of what we know about Facebook, for instance, when they're
Hmm.
talking about Trump and when he wanted to write when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and Facebook employees were like, "All right, man, this is the fucking final straw. We don't want to be the ones that are making this platform for the president to be able to like
Hmm.
uh, and me, I understand that that would be the workers infringing the speech rights of the sitting president. I would also think it's worth noting that he probably did definitely break rules multiple times before that, and they overlooked it because he's a sitting president and they didn't want this political headache.
Yeah.
And I think that's like basically what's going on with Twitter too. Like you look at the libs of TikTok thing, it's like do not do anything about this account
Hmm.
without coming up to the executives. And that's what really bugs me about this is we never have this conversation about what workers are required for speech to be produced. Like the same thing in Chappelle and the First Avenue concert, where the workers are like, you know what, we don't feel like putting on the concert for this guy in the middle of doing this anti-trans stuff. And well, you can say like that sucks for all the people in the comedy. It'd be nice to like share in comedy or whatever. Do you think the bosses should be able to force those workers to put on that show or not? I
Hmm.
don't think so. And like I think that's a pretty like big dividing line between liberal free speech and leftist free speech. And like I still think there's to value like differing opinions and stuff like that, but when workers start putting their foot down, I think it's important to be clear about that and not say like the government is forcing these companies to be woke liberals, because that's the exact same thing that's going on with Disney and Ron DeSantis too, which is that like they have a new CEO in there. He doesn't want to be as
Mhm.
sort of woke as the previous one. And so all of a sudden the talent at Pixar is like, hey, wait a second, we can't do anything for representation now without like being attacked as groomers. Like
Mhm.
that's not the workplace that we want. And so we have this thing where like Ron DeSantis is standing up to to Disney. He's standing up to Disney's workers with the CEO, and that's time and time again these speech issues, and it really bugs me.
I think more than anything, there's always this conflation when we talk about big companies that have a lot of influence and power, where it's flat. It's like Disney this, Twitter this. Um, and as we know, within any kind of organization, particularly a capitalist business, um, there are
Yeah,
very different groups involved in that. And the question that interests us as socialists is like who has the final say and the power.
and
So on
I'm
that.
not a fundamentalist about this. If the Pixar workers were like, hey, we want to do pro Klan stuff,
Mhm.
I'd be like, you know what, I'm gonna reserve my right to criticize these workers here and not support them in that. But like when they're doing stuff that I think is broadly positive, like standing up and saying, I mean, it's like I keep thinking of all these lessons that we supposedly learn about technological companies participating with the government. It's like IBM and the Nazis and the punch cards, right? And it's
Mhm.
like it would have been nice if the IBM workers were like, you know what? I don't think we want to do this. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. And, is really, yeah. And that's why I do appreciate like Ben and Bronco making the effort. But I also think like the meta conversation, especially about like how you're doing a limited hangout for a billionaire,
Mhm.
uh, like is even more important than that.
Yeah, well, I said I didn't want to make this a segment, but it did.
We
I'm
did,
happy for
yeah.
that. No, thanks and thanks so much, Matt. I mean, you're ready to go. Well, do we want to give people an update on JFK, or should we do that in the post game? I think he's
Folks,
doing well.
we will release this for everyone in a YouTube video, but we're gonna reserve the JFK stuff for post game.
We get access to that patreon.com/left reckoning. Come see us January 22nd at the cutting room. There are links below to come and see us. Me, Matt, Ben Burgess. Y'all can ask a question. Make Matt and Ben fight at the end of our 2 hour long show or whatever
Yeah,
about
please.
free speech and Twitter. We'd love to see y'all. And, it really helps us, to have folks there, especially since we do want to, go and visit our friends in Minneapolis and Atlanta and stuff like that. And having good performances at New York helps us do that.
Absolutely, we're gonna crush it at that cutting room
I'm
too.
stoked for that. Well, anyways, folks, so we're going to post game patreon.com/left reckoning, $5 a month. It really helps Matt and I continue to grow the show. We're at what, 97, three from 100. Pretty exciting. I've been feeling very blessed about how much we've been able to do. And I can't tell y'all, like, we got some big plans and hopes for this. So all the support really helps us continue to grow and expand the team, hopefully down the line. Um, Come see us in the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning. We'll be back with a bonus episode this weekend. And for everyone else, I'll be here on Thursday doing a Griscom stream. And everyone else will see you on Tuesday.
Peace.